I'm seeing a lot of OV hoes, a lot of champagne pipe takers, a lot of Aubrey Graham gobblers, 69 GODs, FANs, whatever you want to call the other side. They've been saying that 2024 is the biggest that Kendrick has ever or will ever be. If Drake never responded to like that, Kendrick's music would be flopping on the charts, and it's only because Drake graced this battle with his presence that Kendrick was able to collect hit records on the charts like they were Infinity Stones and achieve unprecedented, uncharted success on the Billboard charts. And that's fair to say. I mean, Kendrick did beat out many of Drake's streaming records with Not Like Us. It became the fastest song to reach 100 million streams on Spotify, hitting that milestone in only 9 days, a record that was previously held by Drake's record God's Plan, which took around 14 days to hit that same milestone. We also saw Kendrick break Drake's record for being the rapper to debut the most amount of songs at the #1 spot on the Billboard chart in a single calendar year, with Like That, Squabble Up, and Not Like Us. And now the total number has been revealed for how much revenue each song from this legendary battle between Drake and Kendrick have actually earned. And for all these OV hoes who are saying that Kendrick owes all of the success to Drake, I want you to take a look at these numbers with me and answer one specific question. If Drake is the reason for all the success that Kendrick has had, why has he not been able to concoct that same type of success for himself? Billboard has reported that all of the diss tracks in total have generated over $15 million in revenue, which is absolutely insane because if you break it down, we're talking about 6 records here. Meet the Grams, Euphoria, Not Like Us, Family Matters, Push-Ups, and Like That. To put it into perspective, an album would generate $15 million if it sold around 1.5 million copies. We're talking about 6 songs here, not even an album's length worth of material. We're also only talking about songs that released in the last 6 months. It's not like these songs have been out for years and have been able to accumulate revenue over time. $15 million for 6 songs in less than 6 months is absolutely insane. And what's even more insane is how that revenue was actually divided between all the different songs, how much each of them earned. So the first song to kick off this entire battle, Like That, generated a whopping $4.6 million since it was released back in March. And it begs the question, I wonder if Kendrick Lamar was never featured on that record and it was just Future and Metro Boomin, how much it would actually end up selling. And just because we're getting into holiday season, I thought it's interesting to note that according to the Guinness World Record, the world record for best-selling song of all time is held by Irving Berlin for his song White Christmas, a record that was released all the way back in 1942, which has sold an estimated 50 million copies worldwide and has generated around $36 million in royalties. But back to Drake and Kendrick, while Drake definitely put up somewhat impressive numbers, not necessarily for his standards, but for regular artist standards, the revenue that Drake's diss songs did generate would have been life-changing. But for Drake himself, especially when you look at the numbers that Kendrick was putting up, they were very unimpressive to say the least. And again, it begs the question, if all of this newfound success that Kendrick has had is all thanks to Drake, if this being his biggest year yet is all thanks to Drake, then why couldn't Drake channel that energy into his own records to make them as successful as Kendrick's? This is Kendrick's biggest year yet, if you want to call it that, is because he was able to go up against the most commercially dominant rapper in hip-hop and not only give us a diss track that we will likely be playing for the next 20 to 30 years, but the numbers he put up against Drake's diss records absolutely obliterated any argument you can make for Drake having just as strong of a performance throughout this battle as Kendrick had. Now, the numbers aren't all that matters, but the goalpost keeps getting shifted. First, it's Drake is a better rapper. Then we get Euphoria and Meet the Grams. Then it's Drake is the bigger artist. Kendrick will never be on his level. But let's take a look at these numbers, right? So Family Matters and Push-Ups both clocked in at a little under $1 million in revenue for 2024. Again, quite impressive for just 6 months of being released, but not quite impressive for Drake's standards. Family Matters generated $981,000 and Push-Ups generated $969,000. Now, in saying that, Like That alone sold over double what both of the Drake diss records did combined, but what's even more insane is how much revenue Not Like Us generated. But what is interesting is how low the revenue was for the first diss record that Kendrick put out, Euphoria. Billboard reports that Euphoria only generated $441,000, but that number is oddly low for several different reasons. Firstly, Billboard reports that Meet the Grams almost doubled Euphoria's revenue with over $700,000 generated since its release. However, if you go and look at each of their numbers on Spotify, Euphoria has over 310 million streams, while Meet the Grams has less than half of that with 123 million streams. So how did Meet the Grams earn over double the amount of Euphoria when it has half the amount of streams as Euphoria? Doesn't necessarily add up. What's also weird is that on the week of May 15th, 2024, Hits Daily Double, which is another sales publication, had published all the revenue that different songs generated for that week, and they had Euphoria at over $212,000 just for that week alone, which was a 97% increase from the week before, meaning that the week before, Euphoria had probably generated around $100,000 in that week. Now, I bring up all these numbers to say that if Hits Daily Double is saying Euphoria generated over $300,000 in its first 2 weeks of release, how is it that Billboard is reporting that in over 6 months, the song only generated $400,000? So you're telling me that 75% of all the revenue that one song generated came from its first 2 weeks? Like everyone just basically stopped listening to it after that? I don't know, maybe I'm just coping, but personally, that's my favorite song from this whole battle, so I hate to see it selling 50% of what Drake diss songs were selling. But regardless, the most insane milestone in this entire thing is the fact that Not Like Us clocked in just 6 months alone, a whopping $7.6 million in revenue generated. Just absolutely insane to see, especially when you consider the fact that I said beforehand the song that holds the Guinness World Record for highest selling song only sold 50 million copies. Now, I'm not sure if maybe that record hasn't been updated in a while and if it still holds true, but if that does hold true and the highest selling song of all time has only generated around 50 million copies sold and Not Like Us has already generated over $7 million in revenue, it speaks volumes to the long-term impact that this song is about to have and the short-term impact that it had and how much Kendrick actually did outperform Drake, not just from a creative, artistic, or rapping perspective, but from a numbers perspective as well. I mean, now it makes all the sense in the world why Drake is suing UMG. To know that your rival's diss song against you outsold your own diss song by over 7x is absolutely insane, and again, speaks volumes to the fact that the success that Kendrick received was not thanks to Drake, but was thanks solely to his own performance. This wasn't a case of the Drake stimulus package. Just like when Pusha T beefed Drake, it wasn't a case of the Drake stimulus package, because we saw Pusha T then go on to drop albums that weren't selling more than his previous albums just because he now had the exposure of beefing with Drake. And it's the same thing with Kendrick. He's receiving the success on the charts based off solely the quality of the music. Billboard does report, however, that Drake sold nearly twice as many albums in 2024 as Kendrick did, as he sold 6.8 million album units and Kendrick Lamar sold around 3.5 million. But again, the numbers don't lie here either. Drake has over double the amount of albums as Kendrick does. Kendrick's got 7, if you want to include everything from Section 80 to GNX. And Drake's got about 15 from So Far Gone to For All the Dogs. So these album units weren't including the diss tracks because they weren't on any album. And when you're talking about their entire catalogs, Drake's catalog is over double the size of Kendrick's. So it most definitely makes sense that his album sales are also double the size of Kendrick's. What is very interesting though is that if you look closely, a lot of people make up the excuse that Drake's earlier catalog is just a lot bigger than Kendrick's, which it most definitely is. But again, we just went over the fact that Drake has a lot more music than Kendrick actually does. But if you want to look at these albums on an individual level, it's worth noting that Damn, which was released in 2017, is still getting 4.3 million streams on a daily basis, which is higher than any Drake album is currently getting on a daily basis. Drake's highest is For All the Dogs, which was released 7 years after Damn and is still getting around 1 million streams daily, less than Damn with 3.4 million streams. And even if you look at Good Kid, Mad City, that's getting about 3 million streams daily on Spotify. And that album came out in 2012, and it's still almost getting as many streams as Drake albums from 2023. Just to put it into perspective, the longevity and impact that Kendrick albums have had, relative to Drake's. Damn and Good Kid, Mad City on a daily basis are still getting more spins than any of Drake's classics like Take Care, Nothing Was the Same, So Far Gone, if you're reading this, any of his projects. And this month alone, Kendrick actually surpassed Drake, I believe for the very first time in terms of monthly listeners on Spotify, meaning that for the first time in his career ever, even with a catalog half the size of Drake's, he's still getting more streams or more listeners on a monthly basis than Drake is. Now, you could obviously say, oh, but he just released GNX, Rapaholics, you Kendrick Glazer, stop making up excuses. His listeners are mainly coming from that new album he just dropped. But I want you guys to take a look at this very interesting chart, which I think does the best job at putting into perspective that from a numbers perspective, things look a little scary for Drake, to say the least, at this point. You could see that way back in October 2023, Drake was about to release For All the Dogs and generate the highest number of monthly listeners he's ever had in his career. He almost hit 90 million monthly listeners when that album first dropped, and Kendrick was trailing way below him at around 45 million listeners. Now, somehow the success of First Person Shooter also coincided with a weird bump in Kendrick's monthly listeners, as he jacked up to around 55 million monthly listeners and stayed around there all the way up until he released Like That in April 2024. Now, around this same exact time, you can see Drake's monthly listeners starting to spike downwards, and Kendrick's only continue to soar higher with each new diss record that drops. Drake also receives a small spike with Family Matters. However, if you look at the drop that Drake receives in the summer of 2024 with the aftermath of Not Like Us, it's an insanely steep drop, and it brought him back to a lower monthly listener number than he's had in over a year. Granted, this chart is from July 2024. However, if these numbers continue on this trend, it's no wonder that UMG and Drake are now in heated negotiation battles, as Drake feels like he deserves more money, but UMG is like, look buddy, your catalog's not selling what it once was. And beyond all that, it's just absolutely insane to acknowledge the impact that something like Not Like Us has had. Not only has it transcended hip-hop, being placed in commercials for Google, leading Kendrick to be the headline performer at the 2025 Super Bowl halftime show. Not only have we heard crowds of 50,000+ people chanting that song word for word like at Tyler's Camp Flog Gnaw Festival, but we now know that this song has generated almost $10 million in less than 6 months. Almost 8 times what each Drake diss song had generated, and the equivalent of an artist selling over 700,000 copies of an album with over 10 songs. This was just one song, accomplishing all that. Just to put it into perspective. Let me know what you guys think, and I'll catch you in the next one.
There's a lot of little nuggets in both of their disses that if it wasn't for these breakdowns, and salute to guys like this, Rapaholics, because I think they directly get it.